There you go.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to strap your seatbelts because you're in for one wild, wicked show video on the Josh Nolan and Oliver Schultz racing. So, Josh, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, Oliver. How are you?
Not too shabby. So, just to start the show off, I'm obviously interviewing you today. Um, so how did you get into like the racing world?
How did I get into the racing world? Okay. Racing has been always been a sport that I've gravitated towards since I've been like 6 years old. That's how it all got started with the wheels are turning. Like this was kind of like my go-to sport. Anything with a motor and wheels is what I go to. And the crazy thing is when my parents, when I was growing up, they always shared with me the story that my first words out of my mouth were car. So when I would go to like a grocery store or like a like Walmart or whatever, I would always say car, and they'd buy me a Hot Wheels. So that's how that all got started.
That's definitely a really cool way, and I know I was hearing on these shows people like to hear what their stories are to get into sport, just like any sport. Um, but probably another question I have for you, Josh. So, um, do you ever see yourself getting into a race car, or do you want to get into a race car?
I do. And the crazy thing is I've been thinking about this the last couple of weeks. You get your mod down here. I would love to take a spin on your mod.
Oh, yeah, I could definitely do that for you, Josh. I promise. If I get a chance to head down there to Iowa with you, I definitely let you maybe take a few practice laps. Um,
All right.
um, but definitely. Um, so where do you see yourself being with the show, and just like with your life in general? Where do you see yourself being in 10 years with like I said, with the show and everything?
Hopefully, with your help and with you being my co-host and stuff like that, I see us being very successful with this and just going like big places with this, going to conventions, going to stuff like that because there is crazy enough, Oliver. There is what is called a great big convention every year that's hosted by YouTube, and it's just convention. And then at the end of the year, they have a huge award ceremony, and it's a really crazy world you get into once you get into YouTube.
Yeah, I'm really excited to do this with you, Josh, and I'm excited to see where the show is in a few years or few months. Um, but yeah, that sounds really cool. But um, so what would you say? Like, what was your hometown like? Did you have like a hometown track that you went to growing up that just
I
kind of?
I did. There was two of them, Oliver. It's called Fairmont Raceway, which is about a half hour to the east of me, half hour northeast of me. And then there's one that's kind of northwest that's more north. It's called Jackson Motorplex now, but it was Jackson Speedway. And I kind of grew up around Jackson Speedway. Fairmont I started going to probably when I was like 16, 17 years old. But Jackson I always went to when I was like 14, 15 years old because that was the go-to local track. You want to go catch a dirt track race, go to Jackson Speedway or Jackson Motorplex, and they would always have IMCA mods, stock cars, hobby stocks, and sprint cars. And then I transitioned from there into IMCA sport mods, stock cars, hobby stocks, and sprint cars. So yeah, that was kind of the go-to track.
Yeah, really cool. So Josh, do you have any like stories or something like that that you have that like funny stories or anything that like, you have from the racing world?
I do, Oliver. I remember back, I want to say 1996, 97, maybe even 98. They had a race at the end of the year. It was always called the Fall Classic up at Jackson. And when they would have the Fall Classic, you'd get cars in that you normally don't see at Jackson Motorplex during the season. And it would just be like cars, from all over the region, that type of thing there. And they were running sprint cars that night, along with, which is nothing new. And then they had modified stock cars and hobby stock. Well, some guy pulled in with his race collar And this was a big deal. Like I said, the Fall Classic was always a big deal. It was a huge, huge deal back in the day. And they knew that they were going to have a huge car count and the fans were going to be there because it was, the last race of the season. Everybody's going to be there. If a lot of money is being paid out, you're going to be there. Well, he pulled his race hauler in, this guy did, and wasn't watching where he was parking, and he took out the lights.
Not a great way to do it to start your special.
And then on top of that, the track promoter's like, well, because they took out the lights, we can't run tonight. So then everybody has to come back tomorrow because we're going to have to run it during the day because we don't have a electrician on hand that can fix the lights. So everybody had to come back. And the guy that ran the track actually lost money on the deal because of the guy taking out the lights. I was just like, yeah.
Yeah. I would hate to be the guy that was backing in the car there. That bad situation.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But
another story I have to share with you, Oliver, is back in 2000, I want to say 2000, 2001. Like I said, I would go to Jackson every week, every Saturday, and I would start off with Fairmont Raceway, then we'd hit up Jackson. Well, Jackson always had a big race for the middle of the season. Used to be called the AGCO World of Outlaw Jackson Nationals, but before that it was called just the Jackson Nationals that included IMCA cars and sprint cars. Well, that year they included the United States Modified Touring Series. I don't know if you're familiar with that series or not, but that series there, they had guys that were really the United States Modified Touring Series that really started out in Texas, and they would go travel all over to the big shows. Well, that year they included the USMTS, United States Modified Touring Series, and they had some heavy hitters show up. And that back then, the heavy hitters were Ron Jones, Mark Noble, Kelly Shyrock, and I'm trying to think who else was there. But there was a lot of Al Hanna was there. Like I said, a lot of heavy hitters were there. And what makes Kelly Shyrock so spectacular with his racing career is when he shows up to a big show. Back in the day, when he showed up to a big show, it was something pretty spectacular because Kelly Shyrock actually grew up in my town that I live in, and that's where he grew up at because his dad was a race car driver. Well, Kelly got into dirt modified racing, and he had moved down to Story City, Iowa, and he was running for Harris Racing at the time. He was one of their factory drivers, and he ran USMTS, and he became the 9-time USMTS champion, which is a feat that's totally unheard of nowadays because back then he was like the Earnhardt of the day, and he drove a number 3 car. So he showed up at the Jackson Nationals, and everybody's like, man, he's going to be running the number 3 A-mod. This guy knows his stuff. Well, not only did that, but he also brought his stock car that he was racing also at the time, the number 9 stock car. So, like I said, yeah, it was quite interesting, yeah. And now Kelly Shyrock lives about an hour and a half away from me, hour and a half, maybe 2 hours away from me to the east, and he builds racing chassis plus races. He has a company called Skyrocket Race Chassis, and he's made millions of dollars making race chassis.
Very cool, Josh. So, another question I kind of had for you is, how'd you go along with how'd you come up with the idea, or maybe you didn't come up with the idea, but where'd you kind of start this show? What kind of made you start, and what kind of?
Okay, this actual racing show was started up by a guy, Oliver. You ever come down here, and hopefully his son's racing around here at the same time. It started up by a guy by the name of Clay Evans. Clay Evans is from Paulina, Iowa. He's around my age bracket. He's either a little bit older or a little bit younger than me. Anyway, around that age bracket. And I was friends with him on Facebook. I just, when I started getting into Facebook, I thought, well, I'm going to start adding race car drivers because, heck, Josh is a racing fan. Let's get some drivers and let's start talking to them. See if we can get some autograph pictures, and become the ultimate fan. Well, lo and behold, Clay Evans got a hold of me, and he messaged me one day back in the spring of 2018, right around April of 2018. And he says, Josh, can I call you? And I said, well, Clay, sure. I said, been friends with you for a few years with Facebook. I said, well, here's my number. Give me a call. So he called me up and he says, Josh, he says, I have this crazy off the wall idea. And he says, just hear me out on this and see what you think of it. And I said, well, okay, Clay. He says, I run tri-state soft washing, which means I power wash houses. I'm the boss of, I run the company. I go power wash businesses and houses. Besides, I race. And I says, yeah. He says, I became really successful with that. And he says, my thing is this. He says, I've noticed with your Facebook page, me and my wife Tammy and my son Carter were sitting down, we were checking out your Facebook page, and you got a lot of race car drivers on it. And he says, why don't you do something with it? And I says, well, what do you mean, Clay? What do you mean do something with it? And he says, just the idea I have for you is host your own racing show via Facebook Live, see where it leads you. Because he says, right now you're just taking care of your only father. And I said, true. He says, so see where it leads you and let's see what we can get accomplished here. I said, well, Clay, I've never been on a camera day in my life. He says, I kind of get that, Josh, but he says, let's practice a little bit, do a couple practice sessions, go Facebook Live and see what happens. So we had, it was Travis Fajoran. He is out of Marshalltown, Iowa now. He used to run Sport Mod, the 12R was my first guest. And then I had Clay Evans. I'm trying to think who followed that up. I want to say Dolan Murdy was the third one on that, on the first couple of shows. So anyway, we had those three guys, and we started with 38 viewers, and it just gradually started building. And then Clay's like, well, now that you started, do you have any ideas where you want to go with it? And I said, well, kind of, Clay, but I want to kind of get your feedback on it. And he's like, well, okay, let's sit down and talk. I said, okay. I've got my phone to my ear. He says, talk to me. I says, Clay, I've had this feeling that, all these big NASCAR drivers have their racing show to go to, professional drag racers, sprint car drivers. Why not be the voice of the kids and the local drivers throughout the United States and get them involved in this and have them have a show that they can go to? And he's like, Josh, crazy you should bring that up, because he said, I was thinking the exact same thing. He says, have you tried talking to, the local kids and stuff like that? And I says, well, I sent a friend request to one on Facebook. I'm going to see how this goes. So my initial first actual kid on my racing show from outside of Iowa, Oliver, was a kid by the name of Connor Sheffield, and he was from Javier de Grace, Maryland. And that's where it kind of started to build up steam and start to take off that much further. So I had Connor Sheffield on here, and he races with, crazy enough, a non-curable disease. And he's like, hey, can I bring attention to this? Game on, let's go, Connor. Let's see what we can get accomplished here. And we had people just like, man, this is cool, this is cool, this is cool, this is cool, this is cool. Just keep it going, keep it going. So we did that, and then all of a sudden, it just started growing. It started growing on Facebook Live with the USAC.25 quarter midget kids that raced out on the East Coast. And then I went from there, from the East Coast down to Florida, down to Texas, down over to California, and then up into Washington, and then up into Ohio, and then also went up into Canada. And it was just like, this is getting to be pretty phenomenal. So when we started out, we had 38 viewers, but initially, after we got things rolling and going, it just started growing and growing and growing and growing. Well, to the point when the thing come out with, hey, the idea come out to go to YouTube, Clay and I had talked a couple weeks prior to that, and I said, Clay, there's some pretty phenomenal things going on, some pretty amazing, awesome things going on, and some pretty just off the wall things going on. And he's like, well, what's going on? I says, this whole idea you created has just been a success. I says, we've got over 2,000 some people throughout the United States and Canada watching us. And he's like, that's just kind of mind blowing. He says, it's just kind of crazy. He says, well, Josh, he says, well, building on that, before you leave YouTube, you go to YouTube, he says, there's this thing that all of us racers believe in. And I said, well, let's talk. He says, if you have the opportunity to give back, give back. And I said, well, okay. So he says, well, do you have any idea how you would give back? And I said, well, Connor being on the racing show, talking about everything that he's dealing with and everything else, let's partner with Connor and see if we can't figure out a way to give back to him. And he's like, well, if you want to do that, Josh, we'll back you. Definitely me, Tammy, and Carter will, definitely. So let's see where this goes. So I reached out to Connor and said, Connor, how can we help you to give back to something that you want to do with your life even though, your time may be short, we don't know what the outcome's going to come with this. And he's like, Josh, I have this idea of a wish that I've dreamt of when I was a kid coming up, just starting into racing. With everything I deal with, I would love to have a hospital built out here in Baltimore, Maryland, where I live at, to diagnose my disease a lot quicker and come out, if in my time, come out with a cure. If not, be able to help get this going so they can come out with a cure. And he says, if you guys would like to help out with that, that'd be awesome. I said, well, Connor, how about we get together and figure out a way to do a silent auction fundraiser and a way to give back to that way? And he's like, game on, let's go. So I got a hold of Clay Evans and I talked to him about it. And he's like, yeah, I'm on board with this. And Connor's on board with this. So it took me about a month to a month and a half to kind of get things rolling and get around to the local businesses and saying, even though you don't know this kid, but here's what I want to do. And they're like, yeah, definitely, we'll be a part of this. We'll be a part of this. Well, so when October of 2018 rolled around, when we had this going with Connor's Give Back campaign with Connor, we had a silent auction fundraiser. And it started out, there's a few people that showed up. Well, then towards the end of it, people started coming. And by the time the thing ended, Oliver, to actually close out the silent auction fundraiser and be able to donate to Connor, we had raised $738 to get him to where he needed to get started with his dream.
That is pretty cool. I that's so cool to see how this show, that it's just kind of a thing where it just kind of got stirred up, and it was just kind of to spread the light, so kids kind of ended up changing somebody's lives. And I think it's so cool how, I mean, you're really not even that, like, I mean, I guess if you think about it, you're really only close to like a third of your life, Josh, and you've already made an impact on so many people. And I think that's so cool. But moving on to my next question. So kind of going along with like how the show got made, but what people would you like to see onto the show in like the next 5 to 3 years?
I would like to see people from your generation up there in Wisconsin come to the racing show and talk about their racing careers. And then also people that race, get everybody involved, not just, people, hey, through the spread of Facebook and stuff like that, but eventually, have stickers on cars and say, hey, definitely, we want to go to the show here. Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah, that's really cool, Josh. But moving on to my next question, just kind of sorry to hit you with questions left and right, but what would you say? What would you say is like your big, like, what would you say some of your hobbies are outside of racing?
Well, I was an athlete before I became a racing show host, and I stayed pretty fit. I competed in tennis, track and field, golf, basketball, bowling, and I believe that was it. And when I competed in all of those, I literally had to stay physically fit, and I would literally go out and exercise, run, bike, whatever, to keep myself physically fit to do these events. And when I did that, when I left and retired from competing and went into doing this, I had 12 state championships and 1 national title.
That is cool. I think I play a lot of sports. I mean, you were probably doing something every single day of the week. That's really cool.
Yeah, and when I left, when I retired, it was kind of an off the wall kind of decision because my body was telling me that, Josh, your knees can't do this anymore. And I nearly blew my knee out twice, my left knee. And I just said, it's time to start thinking about life after competing. And when I finally kind of got together with my family and said, it's time for me to start thinking about leaving and kind of for the next group to take over, they're like, so what do you want to do? And I said, well, I kind of like to do a campaign, to kind of show my appreciation for everybody that's cheered me on and got me to this level. So I kind of did a campaign. It was called the Forever Red Tour. And because our team colors were red, white, and black. So it was kind of cool to kind of announce, hey, this is my retirement tour. Yeah, I'm stepping away.
Really cool. that I know coming from an athlete myself, I mean, I only play probably 4 sports, and I feel like I'm always busy. It's really cool to see, to not see, but to hear that story. I think there's so much. I mean, I know I see people in the in like public and stuff like that. And I think it's a cool way I think about this way, but like everybody has a story rather than just kind of like right away what you get to know about them. I mean, when I first kind of met you, I kind of thought, okay, it's a guy like he always kind of like racing and he started a racing show. But I think it's so cool when you tell me these stories or like facts about yourself. And it's so cool to see where kind of trips and road marks where everybody's been in their lives.
And the crazy thing is Oliver, going back into my athletic career, when I got chose to do the national games, everybody's like, "So were you caught off the wall by it?" I said, "I was," because I had received a letter in the mail saying, "Hey, you were picked through through the state of Iowa to do this." And they're like, "So what was your first initial thought?" And I said, "It didn't really dawn on me until going to our first national team meeting down in Ames, Iowa. And when we got there for our first team meeting, they said to us, the first words out of their mouth from the delegation, the state of Iowa delegation, is, "Do you realize how famous you're going to become?" And we're like, "No, we don't." And they said, "Well, you have to realize that you're one of 3,800 athletes from across the United States competing in this global event." And we're like, "Really? We never stopped and thought about it that way." Well, then it just so happens for the sport you picked, then we had to do practice sessions down in Ames, which is traveling back and forth, which wasn't a big deal. But in order to gear up for it, well, then when things started to get closer and closer and closer, everybody's like, "Are you ready to do this? Are you ready to do this?" And I says, "It's kind of in the back of my mind. I'm a little bit nervous to do this, to compete at such a high level, but I'm looking forward to this." And they says, "Well, what's your goal coming out of this?" And I says, "I would love to, I'm the fan favorite as it is up here, but as far as to go down there and compete, I would love to bring back to my local hometown a national championship and say, this guy had a dream to do this. He competed at the top level. He's won 12 state championships, and he's won a national title. If he can do this, we can do this just as well." And I just went down there with an even head on my shoulders. And everybody's like, "So when I was down there, they're like, people would come up to me and say, 'Hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of that?' And I'm like, I'm not trying to, I'm like, it's pretty cool to be here, but I'm trying to keep zoned into what I have to do when I'm down here." And they're like, "That's fine. That's fine. We appreciate you talking to us and stuff like that." And it was really kind of cool, Oliver, when we would go out in public to be with our families, because you're literally separated from your family pretty much for 6 days. You can go visit them and stuff like that, but you're in lockdown quarters. And when we went to go visit our families and go out to eat with them, because we could do that, whenever we wanted when we weren't competing, we had a highway patrol officer or police officer as our private security. So we could go to like out in public, but there would always be a security guard with us from A to B to C. And it was really kind of cool to have that feeling out there.
Really cool, Josh. Just kind of you kind of already kind of did this, but what stories from like your childhood or something or like just kind of throughout your life? What kind of stories do you have to kind of that you've kind of witnessed?
I have witnessed some pretty awesome racing stuff up at Jackson, some stuff that I just caught me off guard. Became friends with a guy up there, and really didn't have a driver to go to when I was growing up. But you have drivers you go to. Hey, this is who I want to be like. Well, there was a local driver that I was up to Jackson and watching. I'm like, I really don't have anything to represent him, and that type of thing. There, well, lo and behold, met his wife and said, "I'm a big fan of your husband. Your husband's running 360 sprint cars out here, and I think that's pretty phenomenal." And she's like, "Really? Thank you very much." And I says, "It happens to be a couple of my favorite colors, red and black with a little bit of orangish yellow in his number." And she's like, "Really? Do you like that?" And I said, "Oh yeah." And I told her what I was a Special Olympic athlete. And well, the next week I get to the track and she says, she comes up to where I go into where we pay to come in to go on to go watch the races. And she spots me and she comes up to me and she says, me and my husband, Gordy Voglar, have something for you. And I said, well, what's that? Well, we have a shirt autographed by him so you can represent him here at the track.
That is really cool. Like I said earlier, it's so cool that you've impacted in a positive way so many people's lives. Um, but I know a big question that's kind of been it's kind of I've been itching to ask you. Um, so if you were to ever get the chance to race, what would your racing number be?
My racing number would be Oliver, and I have thought about this a long, long time. And it's a favorite number of mine because I watched the movie and I thought, that would be the perfect number to have. If I had to pick a racing number, it'd be number 51.
That is, I know everybody has their way of finding numbers, and I think that's a pretty darn cool number, Josh. But if
Yeah.
you kind of staying on the same topic, so if you were to ever have your race car, Josh, got two questions in one here. So what class do you think you would like to, and what would your car look like?
Okay, I have a couple classes I would like to race in. I would like to race in. Ever since I've been a kid, I've always wanted to strap into a NASCAR just to take a NASCAR for a drive. But also, I would love to race like IMCA modified or something like that because that's the only thing I can fit in. I can't fit in the sprint car because I'm too tall. I'm 6'5", and I go to get into the sprint car, my whole upper body sticks out the top, and it's just like this isn't going to go. So IMC modified or NASCAR, but I've always dreamt of being an IndyCar driver too. I would love to. When I was a kid, I would always dream of being an Indianapolis 500 champion. What would that feeling be like?
Really, that's really cool, and I think it's cool to see what people's goals are. Obviously, those are pretty. You'd have to be like Jimmy Johnson to get those goals, but I think it's cool to I think it's cool to see. I know a lot of times like people when they're young kind of get beat down and told, well, you can't do this. There's only this amount of percentage that can do this, and I think when you really go down to it, you're already adding 10% to yourself when you eliminate the people that don't even try. You add another 20% when you eliminate the people that just don't put in the work every single day. And there you're already 10 times more percentage than what people are telling you that you're going to be making, what your goal is and what your dream is. And I think one of the biggest things I've ever heard, or like coolest things I've ever been told is people will kind of cheer you on your way to your goal, but then once you hit your goal, I think a lot of people kind of get jealous and then they'll start trying to knock you back down, to make themselves feel
Oh
like
yeah,
they're at your goal. And
yeah.
I think it's a really cool, and I think it affects everybody's lives every single day. I think everybody can relate to it.
And I have another crazy story I want to share with you, Oliver, and a story that you don't even know, and I don't share this very often because it just doesn't come up. When I was a kid and growing up in the racing world, as far as watching racing on TV and stuff like that, my dad's brother, who is passed away now too, he lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he would come up and visit periodically and stuff like that. My dad had three other brothers, but the one in Albuquerque would come up once in a while. And he would always say to me when I first got to know him when I was a little kid, he'd always say, Josh, what's your sport you go to? And I said, well, racing. Anything with four wheels and a motor or anything with wheels and a motor. And we sat down and talked one day. Probably when I was like 8 or 9 years old. And he says, do you know, Josh, that I'm friends with a really famous racing name? And I'm like, no, Uncle Wally, I don't. And he said, crazy, Josh. He says, I am friends with the Unser family, Bobby, Little Al, and Big Al Unser. And I'm like, that's some pretty famous names there. I said, because you got Big Al that won 4 Indianapolis 500s. Then you've got Bobby that's won two. And, Al Unser Jr. that's won two also. And I says, that's a pretty famous name. And he says, yeah. He says, in fact, they own a garage down there where they work on cars like normal garage type deal. and I take my car down there to get fixed. And I was like, well, that's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool, Josh. But kind of get to end of the show, kind of starting to wrap things up. Do you have anything that you'd kind of like to finally, like, stories or anything like that that you'd like to kind of say as we kind of get towards the end of the show?
I have some words of advice for you, Oliver. I'm going to go ahead and put it that way. Believe in yourself. Don't ever give up on your dreams. And a message that I always live by is, and there's a guy back in college basketball days that was a coach, and it just kind of goes with me wherever I go. And it's something for you to kind of put in the back of your mind because, something, I'm going to give you this goal. My my quote that I always leave people with when I've had a really deep conversation with this, don't ever give up. Don't give up. Don't ever give up, by the legendary Jimmy Valvano, the basketball coach.
That is a really cool quote, Josh. And I think it's a really cool thing to. I know I love kind of, especially that are obviously you interview a lot of kind of young drivers that are starting to get to the sport or have been in the sport and are looking to kind of build up. I think it's really cool to kind of get some words of advice. And I know, coming from a young driver myself, I think it definitely it helps a lot, and it means a lot when you do stuff like that. But
And one of the things I'm going to leave you with, Oliver, is this: believe in yourself because I believe in you.
thank you, Josh. I believe in you as well, in all your goals. And but wrapping up the show, you got any sponsors of the show or stuff like that that you'd like to
Before I go, I'd like to kind of share some of the people that I've met in the racing world.
Okay.
Before we go, I
Okay.
am back when I was growing up. The first actual big race car driver I met, and I was like, oh man, it had to be when I was 10 years old. It was when Days of Thunder first came out in the theaters, and we went to the theater to see it. Well, Jackson Motorplex, at the time was called Jackson Raceway, was doing a huge promotional deal with Days of Thunder, and it was also called the Race of Champions, where they would have NASCAR drivers come in, a few of them. Well, back in my day, I got to meet my favorite NASCAR driver as a 10-year-old. And I thought it was really cool. I got to meet the 1989 NASCAR champion, Rusty Wallace, and that was pretty cool. Rusty was really cool to deal with. And then after that, I met his brother Mike. Mike was really cool to deal with also. But then I also met Kenny Wallace. So I met all three of the Wallace brothers. And then I've also met Kenny Schrader. I'm the last NASCAR driver I ever met. And everybody's like, he doesn't seem very personable on TV, but I says, you have to be able to pull him off to the side and get him away from all the mad rush of fans. And then you can have a really good conversation with him and he'll talk to you. And I met Tony Stewart and had a really good conversation with Tony Stewart.
That is really cool, Josh. And I know we've had talks, and I'm pretty sure I've I've said this in a show before. I think it's really cool out in the racing world. I think it's so much different than like sports like the NFL and stuff like that, and baseball and football and all that stuff, where a lot of times the high, like the pros and stuff like that, they still act like I know I've had times where my dad have talked to Kyle Strickler, who runs in the World of Outlaws, and they really do act like they're just a local driver, and you're just having a conversation with them, And I think that's so cool how interacting and how the racing world is,
And another story I have to share with you is I did have a Kyle Strickler hooded sweatshirt for Oliver. I used to have the I can't remember what his nickname was, the high side tickler hooded sweatshirt. It had the holograph on the back of the sweatshirt. But I used to have a hooded sweatshirt of his.
That is really
Yeah.
cool. But I got said earlier, but kind of wrapping up the show here. You got any special things that you want to kind of add or say at the end of the show here?
With your help, Oliver, we're going to take this show places. We're going to take this show places where it's never been before. We're going to take it to the inside people's televisions and stuff like that. because that's what my goal is, and that's what I want you to have, the exact same goal.
And I definitely will. And I know deep down I've always kind of had that goal ever since I joined your show. And I hope we can get there one day, Josh. And I know if we try hard enough and we do enough, we can definitely achieve your goal and my goal.
Yes, yes, exactly. Exactly. And the big thing I would love to see happen too, Oliver, and lo and behold, it would be kind of cool. I've been kind of thinking about this over the last couple of weeks too. Come out with hero cards with our picture on them. So that way, me and you could have our picture on the same hero card for the racing show, and we could sign autographs on that.
Oh, and I'll definitely have to do that. Definitely.
Yeah.
But yeah. Just
Yeah,
kind of.
definitely. But the other big thing, Oliver, is next year I'm sponsoring you, right?
Yep.
That's a give in. And I'm working on trying to figure out how I'm going to do that. I've got some of the money saved up and put back, but I'm going to wait till probably the end of the month. I'll send you the rest, send it all to you at the end of the month, and that way you're good to go for next year.
Thank you, Josh. And honestly, Josh, I kind of been thinking you really don't need to pay me. I mean, you've already done a ton for me and my racing career. I'd be more than happy just to put your name on me and your show on there, and I think that'd be really cool, Josh. And I think I really want to do a favor for you.
But the thing is, Oliver, I want to help you continue your dream too. So that way, if you need race parts, you've got sponsorship money for that.
Thank you, Josh. And if you want to help me throughout my career, I gladly appreciate it. I appreciate just kind of say towards the end of the show, with my racing career, I accept any sponsors that I can get, especially just obviously with the rapid growth and just kind of price of parts and stuff like that. I definitely could use any sponsorship I can get, but I would really I really appreciate it, Josh.
And you know what, Oliver? I would love for you to see with your racing career. I would love for you to be able to race the Indy 500, cross the yard of bricks, be the Indianapolis 500 champion, and feel what it's like to be in that moment. And to be able to kiss the yard of bricks and say, you know what, I've done everything, if not more, than I've ever accomplished in my racing career.
Thank you, Josh. But kind of wrapping up the show here. You got any like sponsors? I know we've got some sponsors for the show.
Yeah, we've got Dirt Track Race Cars and Company. So, ladies and gentlemen, go hit up Dirt Track Race Cars and Company because they've got some outrageously awesome 164 scale dirt track sprint cars out there in the 164 scale. You've got the 3 cars of Doug Wolfgang, the 8D and 80 from '89. They've got and that's the white car. They've got the orange car from 1990. He's also got the number 29 Weikert Livestock car that he raced in 1985 and 164 scale. Then they also have the number 47 of Danny the Dude Lasowski that he raced in 1994, the Casey's General Store car owned by Gil Sonner. Then they also have the 1 Nance car that Sammy Swindell drove in 1982. So go hit those all up, all in 164 scale on dirttrackracecars.com. Frank Manning Motorsports, Brody Manning and Manning Motorsports. They're at Las Vegas. That kid there, he runs pavement late model stuff. And his dad's like, we would like to sponsor your show. That was been quite a while ago. So Manning Motorsports, and then also New England Hemophilia Association and Walking with Waylon. Waylon Page, very awesome kid. He's like 12 years old, and he had to give up his dream because he has a really rare blood disorder that he can't race anymore. But Walking with Waylon and New England Hemophilia Association. Yes.
Very cool. But yeah, end the show off. You wanna do the honors?
I'll let you do it, Oliver. How's that? You're the one taking the lead on this whole night, so go ahead.
Alrighty. I don't know. I don't know exactly how they are, but I can't remember what you usually say at the end of the shows. I'm sorry, Josh.
Okay, I'll help you out. Ladies and gentlemen, if you get the chance, go watch this racing show because number 1, we're going to go to the top with this. Number 2, this is what it's all about. Number 3, if you guys would like to sponsor our racing show, feel free to hit us up. at my email at jjnolan151@gmail.com or call or text me at 712-209-7138. But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, you guys have a good night. Catch you later. Another episode of the Josh Nolan and Oliver Schultz Full Throttle Racing Show #1 on YouTube, and continue living life at full throttle.
Alrighty.